Hi Year 5 and welcome to Wednesday's English lesson. Today we're going to be looking at chapters 17 to 18 and we're going to be writing a diary entry in role as Jim. So hopefully by now you've listened and read chapters 17 to 18 of Street Child, which is in the folder. Now, as you listened, I hope you continued to make some bullet point notes about the key events in these two chapters because that will really help you with today's task. So you need to have thought about how Jim was treated by Nick at the start of chapter 17, and then what happens to Nick, and what does Jim do to save Nick? What does Jim see at the start of chapter 18? Because it really excites him. And then what does he plan to do, and how does he escape? So make sure you've gone back through and you've added in all of the information about Jim's feelings at each point of the story too. So you can imagine how he felt after having been bitten by Snipe and he's in pain and Nick's going on at him. And then what are his feelings about saving Nick? And then when he sees the circus, and how does he feel once he's escaped? So make sure you look at your bullet point notes or at your mind map, and perhaps you pause the video for a minute and you add any notes that you want to your existing notes. So hopefully you've had a good think about chapters 17 and 18. Now I want you to think about what person is Street Child written in and how do you know? Well, the story is written in third person. So that means you talk about Jim, you talk about he, okay, and them. I want you to think about what would be lost or gained from writing it in the first person. If you talked about I, so you imagined that you were Jim and you were writing it from his perspective. Well, you'd get a more personal, deeper insight into the main character of Jim. You'd know what he was feeling at each point of the story because he'd be able to actually tell you. But the downside of this perspective is that events are only seen from one viewpoint, which is Jim's viewpoint, the first person narrator, which might not be reliable or accurate. But we're going to explore writing in the first person today and what it would have done for the story. So just to give you an example, I've got here an example from the text. It's actually from chapter 13, but it doesn't really matter where it is. So this is written in the third person. Jim didn't dare ask where he was going or whether he would be coming back or if he could just run back to the cottage to say goodbye to Rosie. He was quite sure that Grandpa would tell her nothing. He imagined her hurrying out to him in the morning with a mug of tea and a chunk of solid bread, trying the locked door, calling out to him. He imagined Shrimp swinging his bootlaces over his head, dancing in the streets without him, waiting. Now if I change this to first person, I can't start with Jim, I've got to change it to I. So I would say, I didn't dare ask where I was going, nor whether I'd be coming back or whether I could just run back to the cottage to say goodbye to Rosie. Deep down in my heart, I knew Grandpa would tell Rosie nothing. I fought back my tears and took a big gulp. In my mind, I could see Rosie coming out to find me in the shed. In the morning as the sun rose, bless her, she would be bringing me a cup of steaming tea and a chunk of her solid bread. Sadness overcame me as I thought of her calling for me and trying the lock on the shed door to no avail. So here you can see that we've added in what he's thinking and feeling, okay? So deep down in my heart, and I fought back the tears, okay? So you can get a lot more emotion into it to really get into how the character feels about what's the events that are happening. Now, the type of writing that seemed more like when you're writing from Jim's perspective in first person is a type of recount, okay? And often we use this in diaries. So we've written diary entries before. So what important features can you think of that a diary recount needs to have? Well, they need to be written in chronological order. That means in time order. And apart from the fact that they are true, they need to contain some characteristics of stories, such as some effective description. They also need to be in past tense and first person, and you can have some informal language in there because it's a personal recount that you're writing. So today's task is going to be to write an entry from Jim's diary, imagining he can write. So you're going to imagine you are Jim and you are going to be writing his diary. So you're going to write about the significant events that have happened in chapters 17 and 18 using the notes or the mind map you made earlier on at the beginning of this lesson. And you need to think about where can you include Jim's thoughts and feelings. I'd also like it if you could think about where to include relative clauses. Do you remember those are the clauses that sit between two commas and start with a relative pronoun such as which, who, or that? Can you include any emotive language, so to explain how Jim's feeling, and any other of your Year 5 writing targets that you're currently working on? So I've done a short modelled write only on chapter 17, but it will give you an idea of the sort of thing that you might want to write. Wow, what a few days I've had. Never felt pain like it where that brute of a dog bit me. It wasn't Snipe's fault though, it was that thug Nick. Imagine, even though he knew I was badly injured, he kept shouting at me to work, and now he's put a rope around my neck so I can't escape. Well, that's what he thinks. Then yesterday I went and saved his life. What was I thinking? What a fool I am. It could have been my exit ticket. A whole basket of coal emptied down on him, burying him alive. However, I pulled off all the coal and saved him. Was he appreciative? No, he wasn't. He still didn't take me to the pub and kept me tied up like an animal. He's evil, that man. Pure evil. So you can see I've captured most of the key events from chapter 17 at the beginning when he'd been bitten by the dog and he's in absolute pain. I've explained how he's feeling about that. And even though, Snipe was the one that bit him, he knows it's not Snipe's fault. It was Nick that made the dog do it. And then he comments on the fact that Nick, even though he knew that Jim was badly injured, he kept shouting at him to work. And there's some comments here. Jim's thinking, well, that's what he thinks, okay? And then he talks about how he saved his life and the fact he reflects on it could have been my exit ticket. And finally, he shows that he's still miffed because Nick didn't take Jim to the pub that evening. He still kept him tied up like an animal, and he thinks that he's evil, pure evil. So you need to sort of tell the story of what's happened, but you can make comments and talk about how you feel right the way through. And as I said, I've only done chapter 17. You need to do chapter 17 in your own way, and then you need to do chapter 18. So I want you to have a go at writing that diary today, and then when you've finished, I want you to read back carefully through your writing. And in the margin, I'd like you to write an F every time you've included Jim's feelings, and a T whenever you've mentioned what he's thinking. So if we go back to my example, here I've got what he's thinking, so that would be a T here. So I would type, oops, let's do that in red. So I'd put a T there. And then how he feels it, well, here is definitely feeling, isn't it? And you might be able to put this in the margin rather than above it, but I haven't got a margin here. And here it says, it wasn't Snipe's fault though, it was that thug Nick, so that's what he's thinking, yeah? And down here, well, that's what he thinks. That's an aside that shows what Jim is thinking. And then further down here, then yesterday I went and saved his life. What was I thinking? What a fool I am. So that's what he's feeling. So I need to put an F here because he's saying what a fool he is, how silly he feels, because if he hadn't have rescued Nick, it could have been his exit ticket and he could have escaped. So you are going to go away and write your diary entry right now. You might want to pause the video and do it and then come back at the end to see the rest of the video just to tell you what to do. But once you've written it, i.e. when you've finished writing, remember, go back through, add an F every time you've included Jim's feelings and a T whenever you've mentioned what he's thinking. And don't be frightened to go back at the end and up-level anything that you've written before you send it off to us. And your teachers, Miss Bridges and Mrs. Roberts and myself, are looking forward to seeing your diary entries from today. Happy writing, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Goodbye.